All right. Hello, everybody. It is the Dark Conservatarian, and I am here with a special guest who I have been waiting for a while to get this with. Blue Republic. Say hi, Blue.
How's everyone doing? Hi there. That's my intro.
Blue Republic. Say. I'm not so sure if that timed correctly or not on the stream, but I don't know. Um, anyway, so if everyone can hear both me and Blue, fine. We'll then say it in the chat. That we have nobody in there, but yes, this is gonna be just a very cordial interview. No real specific topic except for talking about the philosophy of Georgism. Now, in case none of you know quite so clearly, on Twitter I had put out a an opinion poll as to which economic philosophy people most prefer. The four options were anarcho-capitalism, minarchist capitalism, social democracy, and socialism slash communism. They're hardly different from each other, so I just lumped them on both in the same option. And then Blue Republic says below the tweets, "Aw, no Georgism, aw."
Yeah.
And so that got me to wondering, what is the big difference between Georgism and social democracy and monarchism? So that is why we're here. Also going to be asking Blue about plenty of his other beliefs, like social beliefs and so on and so forth. So let's start off with Georgism. What is the best way that you think that you can describe Georgism, Blue?
All right. There's two schools of thought. The first one is the ideology was created in a way by a man called Henry George, and he wrote a book back in I think 1889 called Progress and Poverty. And so there's one school of thought that says what he wrote in that book is Georgism. That's the basic tenets around that. But then there's more of a modern movement which really just centers around taxing land. Anything trying to not necessarily common ownership of land, but trying to make sure any economic rent on land is distributed out to everyone in society. So the first part for the classical Georgism, I guess you could call it, is very much like libertarianism. They don't want
Hmm.
capital gains taxes. They don't want income taxes. They see taxes as something that you only need for something that's immoral or an externality. So income taxes, they don't understand why they have any right to your income. You're just working, you're doing your own thing. Why should we tax that? Why should we make an incentive against that? It makes no sense to them.
And that's
Um,
the original Georgism, you say?
yeah, and that it's very much in line with libertarianism, and a lot of Georgists call themselves geo-libertarians.
Hmm.
But there are two taxes that the Georgists do like. One is Pigovian taxes. Anything with externalities, if you're affecting me as a part of a transaction, we're going to tax that. And I know a few libertarians are fine with Pigovian taxes. It goes against the non-aggression principle.
Hmm.
But but the other tax, which was what we rant about all the time on Twitter, is called a land value tax. And the idea behind this tax
Kind of a
is
property
that,
tax?
well, a property tax taxes buildings and developments on land as well. If you have a house on top of land, the property tax will kind of include that as well. Georgia, once again, we don't care about the capital. We don't care about income. If you build a house with your own two hands, we don't want to tax that. We have no problem with that. The thing Georgia's kind of used as an ideological base is the land itself, no one created. It's fixed in supply. No one's going to be able to create more. Maybe if a volcano erupts and creates more land under the water, that's it.
Or if they do the thing that Netherlands does, they just expand outward into the ocean, kind of.
Yeah, but for the vast 99%, we're going to have constant land. It's going to be fixed. No one created it, and
Yeah, I
ideas
gotcha.
that this is ideas that John Locke and even Adam Smith wrote about. Adam Smith was very much against landlordism, which is the main thing Georges dislike, and it's basically monopolies on land that people get. And one of the examples I like to use is you're on a cruise ship and it crashes, and you and a friend are swimming to an island off in the distance to try to survive, and he gets there 5 minutes before you, and then you eventually swim up on to the island, and he says, "Nah, you have to get off now. It's my land. I claim it as my own." You'd tell him to fuck off because you have to be there to survive. You have to have land. You have to be able to survive. And it's an extreme example to make a larger point. It's against the Georgist ideology to say that you can own land exclusively. Now, that's not to say that.
Except for the more libertarian version of Georgism.
Well, it's a bit complicated to explain because we see you're allowed to be with land. It's about exclusion. For example, a deserted island. There's only so much space. Okay, but a big part of Georgism is also fighting against scarcity. So let's say if you go into the middle of Oklahoma, massive plains back in the 1400s, you just got off the ship. There's so much land there. You can create a small plot and build on it. And if someone comes there and demands you pay taxes on that land, you can say, piss off. There's more land elsewhere. Go over there to it. What Georgism aims to do is prevent monopolies on scarce resources. So like in industrial Britain, whenever the feudalistic class owned massive amounts of land and then started kicking peasants off of it, and they all would go and live in the cities in terrible living conditions, well, they would own hundreds of thousands of acres of land in Britain. Georgia saw that as immoral because number one, most of the claims they got to that land were religious claims that they used kind of monarchy and authoritarian means to get, which is a common, actually, socialist critique, but one Georgists make too. But it's also that you're basically saying you have no right to live on Earth that we own. We own the Earth, or this amount of Earth, and so the second you're born, you are subject to us. Not that you're not allowed to use houses or capital or anything you can build, but land itself we own. And that's the feudalistic kind of point of view. And Georgia said, no, that's stupid. We don't like that.
Well, in my opinion, it doesn't sound all that libertarian if it's saying that you aren't allowed to like exclusively own a piece of land, even if like you were the original claimant on it. Am I understanding this right?
Well, I'm definitely not making my point well enough here. Yeah, it's not. Once again, it's not libertarianism. Otherwise, we'd be the exact same movement. But like if. And it's not land itself that we're worried about as much as it is the exclusion from land. So the idea is, if I have 100 square feet of land, okay, we put a tax on that, and I can keep my land. No one's else allowed to come onto the land and sleep there and move around, but they put a tax on it and then give it out as a citizen's dividend. So I'm allowed to keep the land. I'm allowed to stay there. I'm allowed to make sure other people don't even necessarily go on it. But yeah.
One thing that I kind of want to put out there is that nobody advocates for like monopolies on land. When I think of a monopoly on land, I think of somebody owning like an entire city or an entire, say, country's worth of land. It's a single corporation owning that land that is under a certain country's or government's jurisdiction. And everybody pays that one corporate owner the rent and all that other stuff for living on that land. But with the way that we have it set up right now in the United States, for example, is that there is seemingly, the way I look at it right now, is that there is no monopoly on land. Everybody has their own house. I mean, yeah, there are some people who are renters and they pay mortgage, but those who actually own their own house, and then there are some of these small mom and pop shop owners that are owning their, say, 30 by 30 feet square of space to like set up their shop, and so on and so forth. Although Walmarts, those are, of course, spotty. The Walton family owns all these big spots across the country of land where they have their Walmarts set up, and so on and so forth. So I don't see it so much of a monopoly, a full-on monopoly on land as it currently is set up.
Well, no, not a monopoly on the entirety of land in America. There are millions of private landowners. It's let me give you an example with cities. New York has a bunch of urban blight, which is the degradation of households, storefronts in Manhattan that just are run down and look terrible and decrease equity values for everyone living near it. 90% of the blight in Manhattan is commercial. And what this is landlords, people who own the land rights to where those stores are, refusing to allow people to start a business there.
Mm.
Let me think of one phrase. They're waiting for a big renter, like a Chase, JP Morgan bank to come in. And until then, they just wait for the land value they speculate on it. Now, things can go to shit in the neighborhood, and this is what we see in Chicago especially. A few houses start to degrade, the amount of equity you have degrades as well, and soon the entire neighborhood is just slowly turning into utter shit, which is what Chicago is, and or Detroit is a better example. And they're trying to rebuild just by destroying the houses, flattening entire parts, rebuilding, and massive subsidy projects, which cost a bunch of money for the city. What the land value tax does is it makes it expensive to speculate on land. Basically, if you sit back and do nothing and just wait for someone who has a lot of money to come and try to rent out the land, you're going to have to be paying for your I'm trying to think of what phrases, for your exclusiveness, for your excluding of others from the land. Mm-hmm. Is the way I'm trying to phrase this. And once again, it's not libertarianism. It's right. I will make that clear. There are just some overlaps with income tax and capital gains tax and all that stuff, but the land value is where it definitely splits off.
Okay, so the philosophy of Georgism, what makes it so much more different from all other philosophies is its focus on land and land ownership, would you say?
Yeah. And once again, I'm not explaining this right at all, because as far as land ownership goes, you have a right. Like if you build a house on the land, no one is able to say, the government doesn't step in and say this land is no longer yours. You're allowed to stay there. You're allowed to live there, but you have to pay a tax because you are naturally excluding people from using that land. Now, once again, I also want to put this into perspective. If you put in a land value tax, take all the land, take all the rents off the land, and distribute them out to the people in society, which is what classical Georgism did. So, like, if they tax you a 20% land value tax, you pay the tax, and then they take the aggregate amount and divide it by the number of the people in the nation and hand it out. Okay, it was the first, actually, well, not the first, but one of the first basic income arguments that Henry George made back in the 19th century, way before most modern economists came up with the idea. And for about 98% of people, they'll be gaining on this. So if you own a house in Minnesota or something, you pay your land value tax, and then you get back a basic income, you're going to be gaining. Because the people who are going to be losing are the people who own massive amounts of land. Like, there are people in the United States right now who own over 1 million acres of land. And many of them are cattle farmers. Many of them live, and they're using the land productively, but it's just a massive amount.
What unproductively?
No, many of them are using it productively. Many of them aren't. So if you're using it productively, you're not going to have many problems with the tax at all. The total tax on rents, I think, has been estimated about $1.15 trillion, which, for our federal budget, that's not that much, but it's a significant number, but it's not some massive tax regime.
Mm. So there's some comments in the chat. Actually, Red Feather's the only one who shown up in the chat so far. But she says private land ownership means dick. If the government wants to use part of your land, they will. And I do want to annotate, Red, that I don't think anyone here is pro-eminent domain. I can certainly speak for myself that I am not pro-eminent domain, which is what I think is a massive flaw on Trump. Blue, what do you think of eminent domain now that we're on this sub-subject?
Eminent domain, I'm trying to think. No, it's civil forfeiture. That's the stuff that, like, police do whenever they're claiming So
What
eminent
has
domain.
been
Sorry.
roughly explained to me is the government forcefully buys your land from you. You
Yeah, yeah.
basically have no consent in the deal. I mean, I don't know if there's a way for a person to actually fight the call for eminent domain by the certain politician, but if they win, then ultimately you have no choice in the matter. You are forced to sell your land to the
Mhm.
government for a set price.
Yeah,
Is
that
my
I'm
layman's
against.
understand is my layman's understanding on it, anyways.
Yeah, that I'm against. Once
Okay.
again, I don't have a problem with you using the land. I have a problem with exclusion for the land. So uh, if you're living somewhere in the middle of even New York City, they want to tear down your house and put a highway through it. So they're going to buy it from you forcibly with eminent domain.
Right.
I'm against that. You can still live there on the land, but it is a social cost. Here, let me one sec. I have something here that
All right.
might help a little more with some explanation. So I'm going to screen share this. This is something.
And while you're trying to, I'm going to okay, is this pertaining to your current point?
It's explaining better what I've been trying to get across with property rights. Is that there's the right to access, which is being able to live on the land. This is what Georgists kind of are questioning. We don't have a problem with you being on the land. We don't have you living there. We don't have a problem with you selling or moving off the land. The problems we have are with right of withdrawal and right of exclusion. These are the two question marks we have.
The right to determine who will have access rights and withdrawal rights and who those rights may be transferred.
Yeah.
So, if somebody who owns a house or even a small business cannot just kick somebody out of their property whenever they want, willy nilly, for whatever reason that they come up with.
The small business.
A small business owner or somebody who owns a house.
I mean, if someone's in your house, you can't kick. Well, can you rephrase the question? Sorry.
Um, if somebody, okay, I mean, when it comes to a house, I'm not talking about, say, for example, a mom to her kids or whatever. Get out of
Yeah.
my house, because obviously that is freaking, what's the word I'm looking for? That is belligerence or something of parenting. I don't know. I don't know what the term is, but that's not taking responsibility for what you took up in that, and it's of course illegal as it is now. And I don't think anybody within their sane mind, even if they have a different philosophy or approach to it, really thinks that it's moral for parents to be completely abandoning their own kid. So I'm
Yeah.
not applying it to that example, but let's say a dad just to a friend who was visiting the house and was acting all rude and rowdy, or even say offended him, for example, was being too conflicting with his political beliefs, or say the business owner, for example, if somebody comes into their business that they don't want to service, they just say get out of my property. I mean, saying those two examples, they cannot just kick the person out of their property willy nilly as they want to. Is that what I'm understanding correct?
Um, if someone's acting crazy in your business, you can kick them out. Here, in fact, here this is a better way of explaining it. We have taxes on alcohol, and the idea behind
Hmm.
taxes on alcohol is it's legal to drink. Okay, it's perfectly fine. We understand that. We're not going to go to prohibition, but there is an externality. If you are a husband, if you're going to have a potential driver, you have an externality in society. Your behavior could affect people negatively. You could beat your wife or something. If you produce carbon dioxide for global warming, many people advocate for a carbon tax. So you have to pay back to society some of the damage you're doing. Okay. Now you're still allowed to produce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You're still allowed
Which
to
I'm
drink alcohol.
overall against, by the way. But go on.
Um, you're still allowed to drink alcohol. What's a are you for any externality taxes in particular? to make this example a bit better.
I do not know what you mean by externality taxes. I'm not
Um,
completely against taxes because I'm not a full-on anarchist. I think that for what military that we have that is designed to like protect the people within a given piece of land, that being everybody who lives in the United States, for example, that obviously needs to be funded in some way. And though I do agree with ANCAPs to a certain extent that taxes, even the smallest tax, is still a mild immorality, I say, yeah, are you going to miss that, say, that 1% or 5% tax or whatever low amount of tax that much?
let's phrase it like this.
But
A
I'm
company.
not for carbon taxes, if that's what you mean by externality tax.
Okay, let's put it like this. A company is dumping chemical waste into a river that flows through the middle of town and can infect people and make it terrible.
I
Like
would
that.
define that as a fine.
Yeah, a fine. Okay, a
I
it's
don't think they should be consistently like taxed for what's part of the river that they own. But if they do commit something that affects another person's property or well-being in a negative way, rather directly, that's the point that they get fined.
yeah, they get fined, which is what I mean by an externality tax. It's a you have to pay a little bit of money because you're affecting other people. Is what I'm trying to get across.
See,
Um,
the reason why I cannot say yeah, punish a person for like emitting carbon emissions, because that is not so direct. That's more like indirect. Like there are thousands, millions, billions of people, uh, like pumping CO2 into the air. There ain't no one person that is solely responsible for violating your rights in a direct and immediate way. Like the most that it could be is that eventually you might contract lung cancer or something for the modern day society that we live in, where people are like driving cars and so on and so forth.
all right,
Um,
let's put the carbon attack. I'll table the carbon tax. All right,
but with a
and people still consume products that use carbon dioxide, so it's a bit strange to make the
but
moral argument there. But
I also want to annotate, but say, for example, since we're on carbon emissions, if somebody, say, like, turns on their car indoors and there's no way to vent the carbon monoxide out of the air, and himself and everyone else who dies in that room from the carbon monoxide poisoning, then or is it, let's say that the person who originally turned on the car turned it on and just left the room, and everyone else who was staying in the room died of carbon monoxide poisoning or something else. I think that person should be held for manslaughter because he is
yeah,
directly in effect of that person's rights. But go on.
that's negligent homicide. That's a bit. But well, okay, with the
Okay,
river
parental
example.
negligence was the word that I was
Yeah.
looking for. I just remembered. Thank you. Go on.
uh, with the river example, where they're putting toxic chemicals in the river, and so there are two things that the company can do. They can either stop dumping toxic chemicals in there, or
Yeah,
they can pay a fine, which is essentially the same thing as a Pagovian tax here.
I.
You're doing something. No.
Here's my thought. Say the first time they do it, they get fined. But if they're repeatedly going to do it, well, then eventually arrest the person.
Oh, you want to arrest them?
Yeah, I mean,
That,
it's I kind of
ooh.
the whole thing of polluting the waterways that ends up directly harming other people that are using that same waterway. It's kind of in the same of violating of private property rights. Like, say, for example, I live next door to you, Blue, and I want to cut down this one tree that is just becoming an eyesore for myself. But because of my negligence or my carelessness, that tree falls on your house. That's a violation of private property rights. Kind of, I see it in the same way of polluting water. Not only are you polluting your own water, which I think that you have the full on right to pollute your own water, as long as it doesn't affect anyone else's water or property. But
Yeah.
the waterway that's being shared by other people, you're affecting other people's private property. So therefore, um, first time you get fined, but say, for example, if I was to continuously cut trees and they all fell on your house, at that point I do think that the police should arrest me for damaging your property so damn much.
That's interesting because I don't actually think the arrest is warranted in that case. The thing is, I think the fine, if the fine covers the cost to negate the effects of the chemicals in the water, if that's how much the fine costs, it's essentially like
Well, it's let's
I
also
mean,
keep in
if the
mind.
fine's enough, then I feel like that they're still allowed to put chemicals in the water only so much as they pay a fine that can then go to help cleaning up chemicals in the water. That kind of idea.
Let's also keep in mind that when somebody like dumps pollutants and chemicals in a waterway, that you also risk harming a person's own bodily health or even outright killing them. So it's a little
Hmm.
bit of a different circumstance, just a little bit different from my cut down the tree and the tree falls on your house analogy that I just put out there.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to find parallels to this, but going back to the land tax, which is what this was all about, the idea is that you're still allowed to own the land and use the land, but we're going to have to make you pay a tax on the exclusion of the land from other people. Now, for as I said, 98, probably 99% of landowners, um, you're actually going to be gaining more money back than you'd be paying in the tax. And this is the old fashioned 1889 Georgism, which says you pay the land rent, we're going to collect it all up, and we're going to give it evenly to everyone in society.
Hmm.
That's the old version of Georgism. Um, and the idea behind it is like whenever the Okies in the 1930s were having to leave their houses and go to California and work for dirt labor, and there were massive, massive monopolies on hundreds of thousands of acres of land. This was one of the times that Georgism sprung up again. Was in the 1920s and 1930s because it was massive amounts of land being used and people weren't allowed to sit there. They weren't allowed to walk on the land, and they had to work for amazingly cheap labor, 5 to 10 cents a day, for in many cases. Which
What year
which
was
back
this
then
again?
was 1930s during the Dust Bowl for the Okies.
Okay. It would
Movie,
have been
yeah,
like a adjust for inflation. It would have been a little bit different. It probably would have
right.
rounded out to, say, for example, a modern day inflation rates. It would have been $5 or $6 or something.
Um,
Maybe.
Perhaps I know that the wage rate then was around 30 cents an hour. I did some research on this recently. That was the wage rate then, and today the inflation
Ah.
adjustment would be around 45 cents for an hour for back then. So 5, 10 cents a day instead of just per
Okay.
hour was amazingly small. We're talking about today's terms, maybe in 75 cents to $1 an hour for
Now,
work,
now I just want to
which
annotate
is
everybody. I do not
small.
know the exact inflation rates. I mean, I did hear one time, like somebody told me, I guess that $5 back in the 30s or 40s or something like that would have been almost equivalent to $100 today. I'm not so sure if that is an actual fact or not, but it's just something that I have only heard hearsay about.
Here,
So
I
could
actually
be
should
wrong.
probably um,
Inflation
link
rates.
this so people know I'm not just pointing it out my ass. 1 second, let me pull this up. Um, Handbook of Labor Statistics. Let's screen share here. It's going to take its time to come up. Well, anyways, what's the? I'll wait for it to load. What's the next thing you got for me here?
Okay, so there was Red Feather in the chat was also saying, um, well, she says even if you own the property straight out, you still have to pay taxes. It was kind of something that I would personally was wanting to address, and excuse me, I will say, Red Feather, that still you overall that you do in fact own that piece of property even if you're being taxed for that ownership of it. I mean, yes, again, it is a slight immorality, but that is kind of besides the point in my mind. You you still own it, but you're being charged for it. Whether or not you should be charged for it is a different story, I say. Um,
Yeah, real quick here. 1930, all industries' average wage rate for entry level work is 43 cents to the hour.
43 cents.
Yeah, so they'll be higher than 30. Must have been off by there a little bit there. It actually drops down in 1933 to 35 cents because of the
So Red
depression.
Feather says, well,
Sorry about that.
if bread used to be 10 cents and now it's $3, roughly times 30. So whatever the 30 cents there was times 30 would have been about $9, I guess.
One second. I just did an entire thread on this.
Okay, so inflation.
I'm seeing 5 cents per loaf in 1932, 178 per loaf today in the same region.
Inflation adjustments by year. So inflation calculator, find US dollar. Uh, all right. If it, okay, so I'm trying to look at this right here. Um, inflation calculator. If in 1913 I purchased an item for $1, then in 2019 that same item would cost 25.68. Damn.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's 1930. So let's take this to 1930. Calculate about 15 bucks. And you say that the wage was what now? 30 cents?
Oh well, yeah. For entry level in 1930 was 43 cents.
So about 5 bucks. But that was 30 cents. So let's go to 43 cents. Calculate. 6.55. So yeah, it is a
Yeah.
little bit less than our modern day minimum wage. So
Well, the thing about the Okies is
I'm
we
gonna have
have
to
records of them living off of 10, 15 cents a day
I'm gonna have to
in
definitely share
California.
the link for this U.S. inflation calculator because this will definitely be a handy tool if I want to ever do
Yeah.
a video on economics or something.
Yeah, it's important to have that.
Mm.
Also, I don't know where she got $3 for a loaf of bread. It's about $2 back in Oklahoma, where I'm from. Maybe even less.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is around $2 for me. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Red Feather lives in California or something. I mean,
Yeah,
you don't have to like reveal that, Red, but still,
I
it's
mean,
just interesting. So,
anyone whose name begins with red, I have to hate because I'm blue. So
which,
uh,
by the way, speaking of blue, I like the fact that we have pretty much the same color pattern right here, color paletting
yeah,
in our
yeah,
profile pics.
yeah. I love it,
The only thing is that I have like a dark gray for my face. Um,
and I am Batman. So yeah.
so inflation calculator.
Oh, Red Feather says they're from Florida. So do we disregard their opinion now? I feel like we have to.
Damn, from Florida. I would have thought
That's
that it would have been.
terrible.
I thought it would have been cheaper in Florida, because gas is cheaper a little bit down. Is a little bit cheaper down there than it is here in Kansas, or at least last I saw. But okay, it's a random name. People assume I'm Native American. uh, well, those people are racist, Red.
Terrible.
But so some that I guess I kind of want to ask. How does Georgism on land, at least, compare to socialism on land? Because this is almost sounding kind of, in a little ways, socialist on this one aspect of the economy, that being land ownership.
Um, yeah, in some ways, there's some crossover with socialism on land ownership. Well, on land ownership, not so much. On land taxation, definitely.
Yeah, if you believe
Um,
in state socialism anyway, which Owen would be all like, not
yeah.
true socialism.
Well, I actually tried to set up a debate with Owen about some of this stuff and the nuances between Georgism and socialism, and he never got back to me. We were gonna have Eternal
Oh
Vanguard as a
boy.
part of that, but that was months ago. But
Yeah, you told me about that.
yeah, with Soviet Russia, for example, they had a system of dekulakization where the kulaks owned a whole bunch of the land out in the countryside, and they murdered thousands, tens of thousands of people simply to take control of the land. The genocide that we now recognize in Ukraine, the Holodomor, was also about Ukrainian farmers trying to keep control of the land. And the state socialists didn't like that, so they decided to kill them for the good of the whole. Georgism, we don't care if the farmers keep their land. We're fine with that, but you're going to have to pay a tax. And it's we're a bit more mild. We don't go straight to let's go kill everyone. That's um
Okay.
that's that's a more socialist policy. But the main difference between socialists and Georgists is socialists want to own the means of production.
It
So
doesn't.
all.
it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like full-on socialism on land, in that you'll full-on confiscate the land from the person who originally owns the land. I mean, particularly from the business owner that owns a piece of
Yeah.
land for his business. You just want to tax for it.
Well, the thing
So
is, we don't even
that
want
kind of
tax the
answer
value of.
that
We
kind
don't
of
even want tax. Yeah. Sorry.
that kind of answers my question just a little bit. Go on.
Yeah, we don't even want to tax the value of the land. For example, the Wall Street Journal tried to do, and so did Slate and many other outlets, tried to do an analysis of how much is all the land worth in America. And the number they got was around 20 trillion. Okay.
Damn.
Yeah.
Are they like saying that because we have so much debt, that's what it's worth, or what?
No, that's just the value of the land because you have to have
I'm
land to be able to create products and stuff.
I'm halfway joking, by the way,
Oh.
because
Yeah.
something that I think we should clear up. Red Feather asks in the chat, didn't he just say people would be forced to divide up their land? I think by he, she is meaning you, Blue. So you want to respond to that?
Um, sure. No, we don't want to divide up developed land at all. I don't know what they're. I'm trying to read the chat right now, catch up on it. No, we just want a tax on the rent, and this is why I was saying the total value of all land is around 20 trillion. The rent on land is only about 5% of land value. It's only about $1.15 trillion from the analysis I've seen.
Hmm.
Okay, so we don't even want to tax 100% of the value of the land are on. We're only trying to tax the amount that your personal and exclusive ownership of the land is worth. So it's and once again, I don't know what. It's not about confiscation. It's not about taking land and giving it to different people. It's about yeah, I don't know what she's talking about or he's talking about there. Dividing up the land. That's not
She
that's
Red Feather is
yeah.
a woman.
Yeah, I kind of thought so, but I wasn't sure.
Oh, okay. Um, but when
Anyways,
it comes to Georgism, say something when it comes to food production and selling. What or say computers or some other products that can be like sold as a carryable possession, like this mug, for example. What would be the Georgist philosophy on something like that?
you mean like taxation policy kind of thing?
Well, not just on taxation, but how does it differ with other philosophies on that?
Well, it's fairly libertarian for the classical perspective. You can sell whatever you want without taxes. It's your property. Do what you want. We don't really care. If
Can
you're using a very scarce resource that is extraordinarily rare, there we might have some issue with it, but otherwise, no.
but
Usually not.
can a baker deny a gay couple a cake though?
Oh, that's a social issue. So there are some Georgists that say, yeah, you're allowed to do that. Some who say no.
I think that's kind of a crossover between economics and social, but yes, it in large part is social. But this is talking about the principle of private property, for example, because my cake is my property until I officially sell it to you. Is the way I look at it. It there are many different ways of looking at the whole gay wedding cake situation. Private property, freedom of association, economic, social, whatever else have you. But what do Georgists think about that? Do they think that a baker, just as an example, or any business owner should be allowed to deny service to anyone based on any reason?
Um, just from the more libertarian aspect of it, I'd say so. Um,
Hmm.
but the thing is, this is where you kind of get into a different area because nowadays, with internet Georgism and some of the more modern aspects of the movement, you have all different sorts of people with all different sorts of opinions. The one true unifying factor right now of modern Georgism is trying to stop economic rent on land, and that's really it. That's the basis of modern Georgism. So
Yeah. So it seems that the differences between Georgism and other economic philosophies is so minute and nuanced that it's almost unrecognizable on the surface, seemingly. Oh,
yeah, for example, most philosophies right now that we talk about are focused on what should be the money spent on. Like even Republicans support an income tax, but they want a flat income rate or to lower the overall progressive scale. And they want to lower overall spending. Democrats want to raise overall spending.
Or at least they pay the lip service to want to
Yeah.
decrease spending, whereas in practice, or at least the presidents, like maybe some of the there are like a few House Republicans that actually do want to decrease spending, but they cannot hardly get that pushed through because there's so many establishment Republicans that vastly outnumber them, and not to mention the person that actually gets to the presidency, who also turns out to be an establishment type of Republican that just ultimately decreases or increases spending to where we are now with the debt, you know?
No, that's perfectly fair. There are plenty of Republicans who, don't actually care about the stuff. And oh, sorry, I just lost my entire train of thought there.
Sorry, but
Oh,
you were talking about go on. It sounds like you remembered it yourself.
yeah, I just got it. But there was a point at the Republican debates back in 2016. Rubio and Cruz were discussing a VAT tax, and this was whenever I was just starting to really get interested in economics. And they were talking about the value-added tax and all the different kind of advantages and disadvantages to it. And then, what's the guy's name? He's the New Jersey governor, Chris Christie.
Krispy Kreme.
Yes, he interrupts them and he says, "No one cares about this stuff. You're out here discussing random, obscure policy stuff. Americans need a strong leader." And he starts pounding his fist.
You know what? Now that you mention it, I do remember that. Chris Christie was all like, enough with this fiscal conservatism bullshit, this fiscal spending.
Well, it's because, number one, it's because Chris Christie had no idea what the hell they were talking about, and he needed to get some attention on stage. But the funny thing is, he's not necessarily wrong.
The guy is the biggest, fattest dude on there. How much more attention does he need?
Yeah, I hate Chris Christie, but the thing is, he was wrong in the sense that it wasn't important, but he was right in the sense that no one really ever talks about how we fund stuff. VAT taxes get talked about occasionally, but mostly it's about income taxes, capital gains taxes. I very rarely have ever heard an argument for a land value tax. And this is also, I'm going to pull some quotes out here. Milton Friedman, Uncle Milty, called the land value tax famously the least bad of all taxes. Okay. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Thomas Paine, all have talked about land value taxes in a positive light. And the reason for this is with an income tax.
So, say, for example, we only had the land value tax. That was the only tax that existed in this country. I would be free of all taxes because I just rent out an apartment.
Who's the other one? Oh, okay. I think Hayek might have talked about it positively as well. But and so these are fairly libertarian people calling it the least bad of all taxes, which with Milton Friedman, least bad of all taxes is the best endorsement you're ever going to get for a tax, ever. And the reason for this is the land value tax works off of a single basic principle, and that is that land is essentially fixed, which is what we were talking about. And one of the problems with modern tax policy is it doesn't tax the people you're trying to get money from. For example, if you're trying to do a value-added tax on production of goods, that value-added tax can be pushed off in price increases. So you're taxing producers more, but they're just raising their prices in turn. So you're getting some tax money from them, but most of the tax money you're getting from lower-class consumers. With income taxes on the upper class, if they're a producer, they can push that off onto the consumer. And one of the economic principles behind this is there's variable supply. They can change production. They can change the amount they're going to produce, and they're able to have some level of market control. With land value taxes, tax burden cannot be passed off onto consumers of land. It is only on the landlords. And the reason for this is the supply of land is absolutely fixed. And it's a hard concept to explain, and I have some visuals for this, I think. Let me screen share this here in a second.
I do want to ask out of curiosity, though, what did you ultimately end up voting on in that economic philosophy poll that I had put out on Twitter?
Oof, I do not remember. What were the different options again?
It was anarcho-capitalism, minarchist capitalism, social democracy, and socialism slash communism as the fourth option.
Oh, maybe it was minarchism because
Mm.
social democracy, by the way, as a movement, I've never really gotten behind, mostly because I'm very skeptical of pure democracy on its own. And in many social democrats and democratic socialists, they kind of fetishize democracy
I've
as like
always thought
giving
that
and granting rights.
I've always more thought that social democracy was more of an economic philosophy than a philosophy on how the government is supposed to run itself.
It's very well. First of all economic philosophies are soft sciences with political biases.
Mm-hmm.
It social democracy in terms of its framework is probably just like any neoliberals or neocons. I'm guessing, but because you have two main schools of thought on economics in terms of the systems. Like you have Austrian school of economics, you have the Chicago school of economics, you have the Marxist school of economics. But in terms of the way they look at the economy and how it functions, and not what you should do, you have the old classical economists like Marx and Adam Smith, who looked at the material side of things, that the labor theory of value. You might have heard of that. And then you have starting around I think 1874 was what we know as the marginal revolution. And what this did is it added kind of to supply and demand, it added the demand. It said value is not inherent and value is not with material. Value is also based off of perception. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and social democrats, almost all modern movements use the uh,
Uh,
values based off of perception model nowadays.
so here's the difference that I am kind of getting between Georgism and social democracy. Like social democracy, or calls for a heavy welfare state, a heavy social safety net, and like nationalization or pretty much nationalization of the single of a healthcare system to make it, single payer, stuff like that. A living wage, if minimum wage, if not a complete and utter UBI or something like that. Food stamps, Social Security, all that other stuff. Like, how does Georgism compare to social democracy on all those issues that I just mentioned, on welfare related issues?
Well, for minimum wage, we're entirely against it. It's
Okay.
not. It's not a good. It's not good policy. Even most neoliberals you talk to nowadays aren't for it. Um, even many socialists, they
Although
think it's
I kind of think that neoliberals are different from minarchists and freaking social democrats and Georgists and all the other political philosophies. I've always kind of understood neoliberalism to essentially be another fancier term for corporatist or corporatism, unless I'm getting that wrong.
no, I don't. Not neoliberalism is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down.
I
Um,
might be getting it wrong again, but what point were you about to go on?
what were we just on? We were just on
You
the different
mentioned,
policies that Georgia support.
yeah, you were mentioning something about neoliberalism and I don't know, kind of comparing. You were talking about social democracy, neoliberalism, and Georgism.
Well, okay, the different policies. You said something about minimum wage and the welfare state and UBI. Um, the uh, the I mean, the foundational part of Georgism is from a book called Progress and Poverty, which is written back by Henry George in the late 19th century. And we are very concerned about poverty, but a welfare state isn't quite what we're looking for. The idea for Georgism is kind of based off a concept called ordo, not based off of, but similar to a concept called ordoliberalism.
Mm.
And the idea behind ordoliberalism is they love free markets, but they don't always work. So the idea for ordoliberalism is they want to create a system that perfectly emulates what a fully competitive, functioning free market would. And they say there's problems like corruption, There are some inefficiencies, but we're trying to get to that point. Um, and the idea behind Georgism is one of those kind of more corrupt factors is ownership of massive, massive quantities of land.
Okay, so I have neoliberalism up right now. It says a modified form of liberalism tending to favor free market capitalism. So that's just the Google definition there. So I do not know if I would trust it so much more if and I was to actually look into some actual literature underneath the Google search. But so far, it seems like off the surface, I am wrong with what I mistaken neoliberalism to be. So there is that.
Yeah, neoliberalism, but you can't put it into one basket. And by whenever they see free markets, they mean less regulation. They don't mean less taxes. They don't mean less. It's kind of more like the Nordic model, I guess you could put it to.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was just getting a phone call. I'm gonna have to tell them that I'll have to call them back. Uh,
All right.
common. Excuse me for the voice crack there. Common Neffel in the chat says neoliberalism is corporatism. I don't know. Maybe I would have to actually have a full-out discussion with people to understand that. I always kind of heard somebody call Peter Schiff a neoliberal, supposedly, but
Peter Schiff.
yeah. But at the same time, the guy is kind of he has a libertarian slant in his economic philosophy, it seems, but he seems almost borderline apologetic. Uh, apologetic to the idea of business owners buying out politicians, or at least it seemed like that in the debate that he had against Cenk Uygur, that very old clip right there. And so ever since people have been calling him a neoliberal, that's kind of what I've understood to be a part of neoliberalism, is just you know corporations buying out politicians for political motivation and so on and so forth.
Yeah, all I know about Peter Schiff was he was one of the ones who predicted the 2008 crisis.
Mm.
And then he subsequently immediately said there's going to be massive hyperinflation because the government had so much QE. And then, of course, we had 6, 7 years of amazingly low, right to zero lower bound inflation. He got entirely wrong. And that was just kind of funny to happen. I don't know if he's libertarian or neoliberal. I don't know much about his views.
I know that some libertarians like to look towards his videos for pieces of information, so I don't know for absolute certain, but what was the literature that you had shared right here in the side group chat here?
Oh, that was just the old wage rates from 1930s to 1940s.
Oh, okay.
That's
I guess I'm
that,
a
yeah.
little bit late to looking at that link, but okay.
No, it's all good.
Maybe I'll save that link for a later time when somebody wants to be talking about minimum wage rates throughout the years or something.
Yeah, minimum wage is the thing is I can sympathize with some local policies for minimum wage. I can understand where it's coming from, but the fight for 15, even just last year, I've heard that moved up to fight for 20 and fight for 25. These are people who don't understand the
Mm,
economy. They don't understand, number one, the cost of living in New York compared to Oklahoma is entirely different. A $15 minimum wage can't exist in some parts of the country, and it's not nearly enough in other parts of the country. And that's why the Bernie crowd during 2016 just was an absolute joke to me, because it was just with just even entry level, and now even as I'm getting to more advanced economics, that whole group, the Fight for 15 crowd, just they're kind of a joke.
yeah, my burger flipping job want to be paid this same wage of a just to start off welder. Ridiculous. If I'm texting back this person that just called me.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, for people in the chat, I am from Oklahoma. I am not from Finland. I don't know why that's coming up.
Maybe it's
Uh,
a weird accent that you have, but
yeah, it's not Oklahoman accent, but no. And right now, by the way, I am in Germany, so it is 10 o'clock, and I am tired. But I'm gonna stick with you guys for a little bit longer here.
you almost sound like that you would be from Minnesota or something like that. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know about you, but I almost think that we kind of well off tackled the philosophy of Georgism, unless there was something else that you wanted to mention.
I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm probably not the best person to go to on Georgism. There's other people on Twitter you can try to get into contact with, look into literature, things are written down. Um, I probably haven't done the best job explaining it here, but yeah. Otherwise, I think we're good with that.
All right, I see. It seems that the only real difference between libertarianism and Georgism is that Georgism has an extra emphasis of taxing land ownership,
Land value, land rent.
land
I'd
rent.
phrase it like that. Land rent.
All right. So, I guess since we're going to move off of that, um, one thing that I want to ask you before we get on to talking about your social beliefs is what inspired you to get the name that you have right now, Blue Republic?
Um, I've been asked this a few times before, and I have no idea. It was just I created the account very late at night, as all bad decisions were. Deciding to join Twitter again. I gotten banned from another account, or not banned, suspended, and I decided it was just time to give up the account. I wasn't gonna wait a week. Uh, I created a new account. I don't know why I picked blue. It's my favorite color. I support Everton, which is a soccer team that their color is blue. And Republic, I don't know. I like republics. I like them as a system. I
Hmm.
prefer them over direct democracies. So,
Here, here. That's
no idea.
me too, and a good majority of the subscribers underneath my channel. I mean, even the ANCAPs, they would like no government at all, period. But they still find republics to be a lesser evil than a direct democracy.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
I mean, they would be even kind of arguing, I guess, sort of devil's advocate when it comes to electoral college. Which that's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I saw that you and Cult of Ham kind of gone back and forth at one point uh, on the minimum or
Electoral college.
why did
Yeah.
I say why did I almost say minimum wage? Because we've been talking about it so much, I guess. But yeah, talking so much about electoral college on Twitter to the point where Ham said, "Do you want to have a stream about this because he has some rather interesting beliefs on it?"
Oh shit! I never did a stream with him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
did the conversation ever pick back up again from there?
No, it never did. I'm. By the way, that's not a part of the republic. By the way, that's a federalist ideal. That's nothing to do with the republic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, republic is just being having representatives speak for the people. You can have a federalist, a unitary, or a shit. What's the or a confederacy? Those are the three main ideas. A unitary government is a centralized government with a whole bunch of smaller little like states, I guess you could call them. It's like Britain. They have a whole bunch of counties, but the central government makes all the final decisions. A confederacy, there's no central government. There might be a union people talk with occasionally, but it's more like it's closer to the EU or how the EU was supposed to be. And then federalism is where the states and the central government have kind of supposed to be checks and balances, like what the USA is supposed to be.
That almost sounds of how that the United States was almost originally supposed to be, was
Yeah.
kind of a confederacy until much later years in our country. What would you say with that train of thought?
Well, we had the Articles of Confederation, which was the original proposition for a confederacy. But we decided to fight against the British and to hold the Republic, which is what Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, what many of them were for, was for
You're talking
federal.
Articles of Confederacy. You're talking about the time between 1776 and 1787, correct? The time when
1787 or 1783. I feel like there was a weird in between period even
I
then,
can't
but yeah.
remember what it was, but there was a period in between the time of independence and the time that of the establishing of the Constitution and Bill of Rights that we were technically not called the United States of America as we have referred to ourselves for the past over 200 years now. Little over
Oh,
200.
yeah, we weren't united. That's it. We were a confederacy for I think maybe a decade. That was it.
Hmm.
But we became the federal republic, and it's actually interesting though because then there was of course the two main parties at the time were the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. The Democratic Republicans were a single party, um, and the Federalists actually kind of pushed for almost a unitary government, far more centralized power. And the Democratic Republicans moved a bit more in the Jefferson idea towards more of a confederacy, but still holding on to some Federalist frameworks. As it's a very interesting time in history I like to study. But
So you would say that the Electoral College
oh yeah,
isn't. You would not really call that a republic form of governance so much, but you definitely would not call it democratic, but it's more federalist to put it more accurately.
yeah, because the idea of the Electoral College is um, we want the people to have a say, but we want the states to have a say as well. We don't. It's not just direct democracy. We want some representation for the individual uh, states for
States.
some level of sovereignty for them as well. And actually, I did some basic kind of math to kind of clarify this for. There are two kinds of policy you're going to have to deal with: policy that works on the national level and policy that works on a very local level.
Hmm.
Um, this is some annoying math I can go into here to kind of explain my views because I know tons of people hate the Electoral College, and I don't want this to just get passed over because I think it's a very important subject. If you're looking to maximize the amount of the happiness of everyone in a nation, one of the things you have to do is leave people more to their own devices. And one of the ways that I like to here, let me screenshot this.
Okay.
Um, that's actually a terrible idea. One sec. Stop screen sharing.
By the way, do you have only like one screen for your computer?
I have a few different tabs open right now,
Well,
but
no, no, no. I mean, do you only have like one monitor for your computer?
yeah, that's all I got.
Are you on a laptop, by the way? Because I know that you say that you're in Germany right now.
Yeah, I'm on a laptop with very shitty Wi-Fi, so if there's any buffering problems, that's on me.
Well, I am like at my desktop right now, and I got two monitors. Dual monitors, motherfucker, for
Oh
the win.
man, I need that. All right.
Like I have my monitor right here where I'm looking at Google Hangouts and you, and then I have my monitor right here, my white monitor that is where I am actually looking at the chat, where I have my whole live stream set up, an OBS tab in.
Yeah, my setup back home is a bit better, but this is, anyways, for the Electoral College. Um, I have an example. I sent this to Ham, Code of Ham, a while back, and the idea is, let's say there are three. And this is gonna take a little while, but there are three different states. Okay, 40. There are 100 people in these three different states. Okay, 40 support the red party, 10 support the blue in state A, 10 support the red party, 15 support blue in state B, 10 support the red party, 15 support the blue party in state C. Okay,
Mm.
and the basic idea is the red party likes the temperature in the country to be very hot. Okay, and the people in the blue party like it to be
Apparently,
cold.
they have terraforming technology
Yeah.
in this rhetorical country of yours.
Exactly. There's some deeper political message here, but we're gonna skip over that. Now, if you're able to set the temperature different for each state, so each state can control their own temperature, um, you're gonna have about 70. You're gonna have 70% of people being happy because each state can maximize to their own population. But if you have countrywide policy that affects everyone at once, your maximum happiness is going to be 60%. And I have the math here. You guys can go over it. You can pause the video and look at it. Um, and this is one of the ideas why I personally support local control to a great extent. I like states' rights. I think the 10th Amendment has been trampled over far too much. Um, and there are some areas where you can't have local policy. The military can't have 50 different small militaries that occasionally band together to go to war. You have to have a national military. But for the most part, I think that a lot of issues can be left up to the states. Um, with almost all federal policy, I think the first question that needs to be asked is, why shouldn't just the states be doing this? Why do we need the federal government to step in and say, all right, we're going to take care of this? And I can understand the reason why people dislike the Electoral College today. We have a system that's more and more centralized. Under the Bush, Clinton, and Obama presidencies, we've seen more and more power go to the executive. And as more and more power is in the federal government, it makes less sense for the Electoral College to have a state say. If we're just going to have a unitary system where the federal government takes care of everything, we should probably have direct democracy for the federal government. I can understand that argument. I just don't think we should have executive federal power expanded that much at all. I disagree with that initial premise. Anyways, people can pause this, look at the math and stuff. I am a supporter of the Electoral College, though. People are allowed to criticize that if they want.
Yeah, but you just have a little bit of a different take on it. You had a different way of arguing it. Say, the way that I would argue, the way that I've kind of recently proposed on the arguments of Electoral College is that it gives both the majority and the minority a possibility to win instead of the majority, like, always winning. It's just that the majority will have to be strategically placed right within the states. Otherwise, if they're not placed right, you're going to have like a Trump or a Bush type of victory where the minority opinion wins. The minority opinion, of course, those two times being, we want a Republican president. The majority opinion was, we want a Democratic president. But during Obama's election, the majority opinion was, we want a Democrat president. The minority opinion was, we want a Republican president. Right in that election, in 2008, and of course 2012, we can throw that in, the majority opinion won because they were like placed in the right states to swing the Electoral College votes in the right way for them to get their president. The biggest problem with why that the majority opinion doesn't always win is because too many people of the majority opinion bunch up together in all these states. And so therefore they kind of diminish their own possibility of winning and their own voting power in a way, sort of. Because the Electoral College is kind of designed in a way so that the minority opinion or the people that live in the rural area get a little bit more of a, I guess, of a per capita voting power as far as Electoral College votes go for who becomes president.
That's kind of close to where I'm at. I'm more concerned about the idea that it's not that the majority winning I'm against. It's that if the majority wins, I want to make sure they're not going to turn around and take away the rights of the minority. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm at.
It's not like I want to make it so that every single time the majority is prevented from winning. I just want to make it only a little bit harder. And the way to evade the way of making it hard for yourself is to just be living in the right states, so to speak.
And by the way,
if my way of thinking here makes any sense to anyone watching, or you, Blue.
And by the way, on the I get you. On the local level, on counties, municipalities, and state governments, I support direct democracy there. On a local level, you should be able to directly vote for whatever you need. But as you start voting on a national level, should people in New York have an equal vote for national policy that will more affect people in Minnesota than people in Minnesota? Is that not all national policy is created equal. Some national policy is going to hurt people in rural areas and rural states. Some of it's going to help people on the coast. Some of it's going to hurt people in the South. And so because of that, we need the regions to be able to represent themselves as well, and not just individuals.
I think a way... go on.
No, that's all I got.
Okay. I mean, it kind of seems like I'm almost seeing as to where that you're trying to get at. If there wasn't so much focus in the executive branch as far as how power is focused, because it almost seems that nowadays that the federal government has more power over the states than the states have power over their own, their own appropriate jurisdictions, Because, the EPA being this federal agency that is controlling and directing of all environmental policy across the United States. You do not have each state having their own individual, I guess, miniature EPA to tell themselves uh, appropriate for their own state how the state is going to govern in that aspect. Um,
Yeah,
but
we've
because
always had the
because
supremacy clause. We've always had it where the federal government, where state constitutions are subordinate to federal law.
but
So
what
the
I'm
supremacy clause has been there for a while. The problem I have is the federal government wasn't supposed to be so expansive. It's not that they're supposed to be more powerful; it's that they're supposed to have less powers total.
Yes, exactly. So because nowadays we have like more power being focused to the federal government, the electoral college is a little bit more needed. But say if there's more power put in the local governments and the state governments, would you say that there is less need of an electoral college?
I think it's a weird way of phrasing it. I kind of think, well, as there's more power in the federal government, I think you have a catch-22 because the electoral college makes less sense if the federal government is going to do everything. If the federal government's going to be like a state government, if it's going to have full and total control of your entire life, not, or I mean, of all the laws that will affect your life, it kind of makes sense to have direct democracy and not have an electoral college. But at the same time, if you want to go back to state government where they have some greater level of sovereignty than they have now, you would need the electoral college more than whenever you do have state sovereignty. You're going to have negative or backwards pressure.
Okay.
It's a
So
weird way of framing it.
I like the way that the conversation just kind of progressed here. Originally, I was talking about and asking about the origins of your name. Then we got talking about republics and forms of government.
Yeah.
But some that I want to ask about your social beliefs, more or less, because I do not know where exactly that I heard it from. I almost want to say a certain person I heard it from, but I won't mention his name. But
That's
I
fair
thought
enough.
I heard it from them that you were more or less a little bit more social conservative than some people within our, as compared to some people within our circles.
Um,
Like, what's your opinion on social
Weird.
issues like, say, drugs and sex?
Um, the more the better. I mean,
The more liberals, the
um,
better. So, more of a
I
libertarian leaning.
yeah, I'm pretty libertarian, but that's a legal principle. With what you're with what I like, um, I mean legally I'm more libertarian on social issues. You can do what you want. I don't care. Why would I? You know that's where I'm more at. Where I'm at personally, like just what I would do as a human being myself. Um, I don't know. I'm more of an introvert, but I'm fairly left wing on some social issues. I don't transgender. I'm very pro trans.
Mm.
Uh, I'm bi. I'm technically
Owen,
LGBTQ. But
although Owen and his followers would kind of disagree with you for daring to
oh god,
argue about how if somebody does not like dick, then suddenly they're transphobic.
yeah, that was frustrating.
Like, some people cannot get it through their thick skulls that not every, especially straight dudes, not every person likes the idea of rectal penetration. They want to experience, well, vaginal penetration. Be it a straight dude doing the penetrating or a straight woman getting the penetration. It's kind of a crude way of putting it, but it still is the best way for me to get the point through.
Yeah, it was funny because he said multiple times in that conversation that attraction is regardless of genitalia. And now my point was like, all right, you can be like attracted to someone and not know whether or not they have a penis, and you just they look pretty. But then once you find out, you know, like you're hetero, if you find out that a female has a penis, and
Yeah.
that'll change things for you. The more information changes the equation for some people. And I had some people who said outright to me, "No, that's transphobic," which was just that was one hell of a conversation we had on
I
Twitter
mean,
that day.
it's kind of in the same thing with a person when it comes to their beliefs. Like, for example, I'm primarily into black women. I can like
All
look
right.
at almost any black women and notice that they are beautiful. But if I get to know them more as a person, and I come to find out that they are, say, a BLM supporter. This is not me generalizing, by the way, necessarily, but um, a BLM supporter, believe in white privilege, want to believe in white guilting or something like that, all that other stuff, and their beliefs on economics even. Say they differ from me on economic issues so much to where they're all like, "Oh fuck you! You support Rand Paul? How dare you? You care only for the rich." I mean, actually, this doesn't even go for just black women. It goes for any woman or any person in general. You can look at them and notice that they are good looking, but once you find out what their beliefs are, you go realizing, yeah, I'm not going to want to spend my entire life with this person as a married spouse because there's going to be too much conflict in disagreements. And some people, no matter how nice a person you might be, aren't able to so much communicate their beliefs with the person and keep the cohesion between the two people. I mean, if I find out, for example, that their beliefs is something that I don't think that I could like be with for the rest of my life, does that mean that I have a phobia towards their beliefs? I mean, as a person can say that it's not quite equivalent because we're talking about beliefs, whereas like I shifted from talking about trans issues to beliefs, but still, I mean, I've never really understood the whole thing of saying that's a phobia. Like, yeah, if you believe in like killing gays or killing trans people or whatever, that is an obvious fear and intolerance. But if you just don't want to marry them, that means that it's a fear and an intolerance. Bullshit.
Yeah, the conversations get. And thing is also it's on Twitter. It's never going to be in good faith. It's never going to end with everyone being happy and going home. You know,
Yeah, a lot of
it's
people that I'd be talking about, that I'd be talking with outside of Twitter. Whenever I go mentioning them, I have a Twitter, they'd be all like, that shit is toxic. I cannot stay there.
I kind of enjoy it sometimes though. I kind of get into the arguments. It can be fun.
Perhaps a little, but yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So social issues. What are some other ones we got?
I thought for some reason you self-proclaimed yourself as a pansexual. I
Pansexual.
know that you just said now that you're bisexual, but okay.
I'm not gonna lie. I don't really understand the main differences. I'm not big into this stuff with pansexuality. I don't. I mean, because that means universal sexual attraction, right?
Mm.
But I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't know whether or not I'm it. I'm not self-declaring myself it though. I'll just put that
Alright.
out there.
You did when I like saw your face at first. Like this was on an off-air call, by the way. When I saw your
Yeah, it was
face at
Zoe.
first.
That's right.
What?
Yeah, it was Zoe. I remember that. It's one of
Oh,
my few
the
face
shut up,
reveals.
shut up. The person who shall not be named. No, I'm
Oh
joking.
God.
I'm joking. But anyways, yeah, it was that off-air call where supposedly she had the shooting. But
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, saw your face and you looked like the most stereotypical cis hetero white boy. But
Yeah.
turns out you're all that minus the hetero part. But it's
Yeah.
whatever. It's whatever.
Um,
I won't judge. I might I don't know, poke fun when we're like on a shit talking or banter type stream, but you can do the same to me. But that's not this conversation.
yeah.
I guess I ought to ask you what's your opinion on gun rights since we're on the social issues aspect.
I am very pro gun rights. And the thing is,
You're from freaking
I,
Oklahoma, so oh god.
yeah, I think it's that's the Oklahoma lifestyle kind of gets to you. But the funny thing is, my belief on gun rights, I've been okay with some level of, I don't want to say restriction, but some level of regulation, like the gun, crap, what's it called? It was after the Parkland shootings. It was a temporary measure for mental health that a whole bunch of right wingers signed on to. I remember even like Shapiro wanted it. It was a
Mm,
temporary gun.
I don't
There's a
recall
word
that.
for it.
I know that he said that in his mind it only makes sense to raise up the age limit for when that you can get yourself a semi-automatic rifle to 21 from 18 to 21. I think that was the age anyways. But I never recalled him saying that he is okay with the idea of a mental health background check.
Oh no, not background check. The gun violence restraining order. That's it.
Gun violence, like if you've already committed gun violence once before, you have a restraining order on you.
No, if your family members say you're in extremely bad mental health, they're able to go to a court and get a temporary, like a half a month long injunction, so they can take away your guns from you. Which was one of the things that the Parkland shooter, not going to say his name,
Mm.
apparently he actually went to the police saying, or he went to either a family member or I think he went to the police and said something along the lines of he was really afraid of what he was going to do and he could hurt some people, and nothing legally got done whatsoever. Like the Parkland department, by the way, was just absolutely culpable in a million different ways for what happened. But the idea that came out, and I saw this in like National Review and some more conservative outlets, was that you could have a very temporary measure um,
Most of the
for
death was.
mental health.
You mentioned the Parkland area. Like, most of the death could have been avoided if only Sheriff Israel asked the cops to act,
Yeah.
gave the order.
Well, thing is the police visited Nicholas Cruz's that kid's house.
You just mentioned
Apparently,
his name.
yeah, I know, I
Fuck
know.
you. No.
Apparently, they visited his house dozens of times. Like they had calls. They knew he was a troubled kid. They knew he had problems, and that's a whole other mess. But with the most part of gun rights, the funny part is I've been okay saying there's some level of restriction. I'm willing, but then I preface that with, but in the future we're gonna need less restriction, because my entire theory on gun rights is it's a check on government in some ways. Like people are like Eric Solwell says, we can just nuke you. It's not a problem. My older brother's in the Marine Corps. We've studied military history a ton. Like whenever we were 8, we'd sit up for hours and hours and end watching documentaries, World War II and Vietnam and stuff like that. A civilian force that's well armed can hold back a government force far longer than people, especially in politics, like to believe. Um,
Yeah, I mean, even if ultimately die trying to fight, would rather go down fighting than than I would rather die fighting for liberty than live under your oppressive
yeah,
regime.
die free than live a slave.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the thing is, as the military has more and more power and has more and more technologically advanced weapons, I think we need an expansion of gun rights. We need to start actually reversing some gun laws, which is one of the more controversial takes I've had. But I've seen too many authoritarian states across the world, in the Middle East, in Russia, in the Balkans. In 1990s, we had a genocide in Europe, in the Balkans. People couldn't defend themselves. They didn't have guns. This is a European nation in the 1990s. Uh, people, and this is something even Marx apparently supported. People criticize,
Right.
many leftist movements. Even Marx said it's authoritarian if they try to take away your guns. You can't let them do that. Never let them take away your right to arm yourselves. And
Mm.
I support the right to own guns. I support the Second Amendment. It's just
So he was more right leaning than Hillary Clinton on that one issue.
well, she liked the Australian mandatory buyback program, and then she lied about it, saying it wasn't mandatory. And like the thing is, if you want
I've
some level of
never.
gun confiscation, just be honest about it. It's the people who are constantly flipping back and forth and aren't being truthful that worried me the most.
I'm not gonna lie. I've never been able to nail down as to whether it was mandatory or not. The Australian buyback was.
Um, well, we have. I'm pretty sure we have accounts of people trying to prevent it and going to jail. I thought that there were
Mm.
some articles on that. So it was either mandatory or extraordinarily pressured on people. Either way, it was something that wouldn't have passed in America. I couldn't see it
Right.
happening in Oklahoma. I couldn't see it happening in Texas.
Something that I want to mention about my own gun rights beliefs. See, it never really
Yeah.
made sense for a mental health background check. It doesn't make sense to do a mental health background check. Much less does it make sense to me to prevent a person from getting a gun because of their mental health background. Because there was like a study that I had read a little while back saying that people who are mentally ill, like PTSD, autism, or OCD, or anything else like that, they're more likely to die from a shooting than to actually commit a freaking shooting. The possibility of them committing a shooting is such a low minority to the point that you'd be overgeneralizing them as uh yeah, I mean, if like the super majority of them turned out to be violent, well, then it would kind of make more sense, I guess, for you to be restricting them from owning guns. But it is such a small minority, like less than 3% of the mentally unwell here in the United States turn out to be violent. So
Yeah, it's
you're going to prevent all of them from owning guns because of that super minority. That is ridiculous.
yeah, it's less about violence for me. I'm gonna cite a personal example here. When a few months back, or maybe almost coming on a year now, my dad had some very depressive episodes. His dad had been an abusive drunk, absolute shitty human being,
Chronic
and he just
depression,
kind of
another mental
bottled it
health
up.
issue.
Yeah, it's a mental health issue. It happens to millions of men, but he grew up in a time period when men kind of were taught to be tough, be the man of the house, and don't really address it. And that's what he did. And he would have trouble sometimes, and he'd think he's weak for going through something that tons of men do. And this is a societal thing, okay?
Mm.
But he went through some really bad episodes, and we have guns in the house. And so what we did is I literally just took the guns, drove them over to my grandma's, put them in the closet. Now the thing about the gun violence restraining order is technically, if my dad wanted to, he could go to court and say they're illegally keeping my guns away from me. That's my property. It's mine. I should have it back. What the gun violence restraining order says is a family member can go to the court and say, we want to take the guns from them just for maybe a month or so. We don't think they're in the right frame of mind. And most often it's going to be about suicide. It's not going to be about mass shootings, which are extraordinarily rare, especially compared to suicide. It's just to have a legal basis to try to keep these people safe. And it's supposed to be very family oriented. It's not supposed to be the government taking the guns. It's supposed to be family members taking the guns. At least the way I've read some of the propositions for it. Now, the thing is, with us, it's
All right.
Oklahoma. I
Okay,
don't want to
you
think
might have.
people don't care about the law here. So what's up?
For everybody who like might have heard a little bit of an audio blip right there, it was because I was about to start this video of Daps when he used to have his old avatar, which I missed that style of art design from him, by the way. But I think this is the video that I primarily heard it from, which he has all the freaking citations down below. Mentalhealth.gov. I think that was, yeah, this was the particular source that he was referring to.
Okay. Oh wow,
It,
a lot.
it was basically what he says in the description. The vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Most people with mental illness are not violent, and only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. In fact, people with severe mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. So no, banning guns from people with ADHD, bipolar, depression, and most mental illnesses won't make a difference. You'd just be removing constitutional rights from innocent people who should have the right to self-defense, especially because they are attacked more than normal individuals. So yeah, like my point was, generalizing an entire group of being violent when really the stats are not in your favor to say that they are generally too violent to be owning guns, you know?
Yeah.
Scorch 88. I don't.
Can you link that video in the chat so I can check it out there? So that's like a lot of good links to find there.
All right. Copy, and it's in the group chat right now. All right.
All right,
And
thanks. I'll
so
check it
in
out
the
there.
chat here, Scorch says, "I don't like that. It's ripping your rights away over a family disagreement that happens all the time."
Well, the family has to be able to prove mental incompetency, and I I mean it's just an iffy area. I just brought it up because I knew a whole bunch of conservative outlets proposed it, and it didn't. And I had a personal experience where it seemed like that could have potentially come in handy, but it wasn't necessary in the end. Uh, yeah, the thing is, I do agree. It's very important to remember that these are inherent rights, and for the most part, they need to be respected. Like I'm more to the right side of the aisle on gun rights in modern days.
So, let me ask you. I don't know. I think we might be ready to move on. Okay,
All right.
he asks how on what you said there. Scorch
I don't know
86.
what that means. How and what?
Um, not so sure what he means. Might want to clarify there, Scorch. But I think we're gonna also move on the subject, Scorch. So just FYI on that. Um, I think because I think we have like talked well enough about the gun rights issue
Yeah.
for a 2 hour interview.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to like check out more Blue Republic, I have his YouTube channel, which
There's
he's
nothing there.
yeah
It's shitty memes. Don't go there.
yeah he's not really that active, but his Twitter is also linked down below. I definitely would suggest following his Twitter because he's fairly
You
active on there.
booted.
So
Almost at 1K. We're gonna get it.
yeah, but anyway, so moving on from gun rights, what is your opinions on abortion?
Abortion, I've been more squeamish on. Uh, there's a few different kind of lanes of thought I've been in. I used to be very pro-choice. Um, 2014 or so, I moved a bit more to the pro life side, and I haven't really addressed it with many people that much. Haven't talked about it that much. Um, I'll lay out a few of the kind of ways I look at it though. For the first week or 2 weeks, I think abortion is perfectly fine in the sense that most genetic crossover in between chromosomes takes about a week or 2 weeks to do. Like before the pregnancy test can even tell you whether or not you're pregnant, it's not even a unique individual. It's not fertilization in terms of crossover isn't complete. So the day after pills, I'm perfectly fine with. I'm not gonna have a
Yeah,
single problem with that. Um,
on a moral sense, I can understand people saying that hypothetically and eventually these zygotes they will turn into fairly well developed 10-week fetuses or something like that, which will then ultimately develop into a 35-week unborn baby, which will then eventually get born into a newborn baby. I can understand those right there, and so morally speaking, I don't want abortion to be a thing at all, but I cannot really see the legal argument to say that no, you cannot get rid of your 1 week zygote. But
well, it's
where,
not even a zygote yet at that point. A
well,
zygote only
okay,
forms once it's an individual topotent cell. Um,
an individual cell. What?
well, it's the cells because we have stem cells which can be programmed into different things. A zygote has totipotent cells which are developmental, and those only are created after the crossover of genetic material is complete, and that only occurs after the week or 2 weeks. So it's not
Okay,
even technically a zygote. It's not,
so like 3 weeks then.
or at the end of the 2 weeks, at that 14-day mark.
Okay.
Some say seven
Well,
days.
I'm
I've seen
just
different days on it.
maybe I'm butchering the terminology, but what I do know for certain is that at 8 to 10 weeks, that is when that they are technically and scientifically called a fetus.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That's the part wherever it gets more controversial. Because for me, also,
yeah,
whenever you get to the third trimester, whenever you get to the late term, I'm very anti-abortion. I
ban
get
it.
more anti-abortion. Well, if I mean for health reasons, I can understand it, but at some point you have to be able to think about the the rights of an individual. And I have had some problems. I asked you guys this in a different stream. I think it was a Strike Force discussions. Is I don't know what to do about like if a mom drinks a small glass of wine, do we criminalize that as child abuse?
Oh no no
Because
no, that wasn't Strike Force discussions. That was the 400 sub celebration.
that's right. Um, Is that child abuse? That kind of thing. What to what extent is if the mother is eating too much sugar? Is that child abuse? Uh, if this is an individual with individual rights, but also tied to a mother with bodily autonomy to some extent, it just seems very. I don't know how to legislate that. That seems like it would take months to try to wade through different obstacles. And
Mm.
as I said, this isn't a topic I've really discussed that much at all. But it's it's a complicated one, and I definitely think the late term abortion talk. It's not for me. I don't want. And the problem is, if you do go ahead and have an illegal late term abortion, it's a 15-year-old girl who got pregnant, and some doctor does it. To what level of criminality are we addressing this? I it's difficult for me. I'm not for it. I don't support it, but as far as you go into the social realm versus the legal realm, it's a bit of a mess for me. Yeah.
By the way, I want to say hello, Dawn, in the chat. Two plebs
Hey,
talking
two
news.
plebs.
Um, I don't know if there's like much more to go on about because we have been going on for an hour and 35 minutes. It's almost 4 p.m. here in Kansas.
Damn.
Um, but yeah, like I was trying to say a little bit earlier, I cannot really see the legal argument for banning anything before 7 weeks. My personally, what I want it to be capped at is 7 weeks or at least 13, 14 weeks, which that is still lower than what it is currently nationwide. Nationwide, it's generally speaking 24 weeks, although I do know that there are some states that make exceptions for late terms. Virginia attempted it. New York was successful at it. I think Alaska might be allowing of late terms to some circumstances. So, by the way, just FYI to everybody, it is not as black and white as I am kind of almost seemingly on the surface insinuating it to be, but there is still that exception for mental health, supposedly. And I don't know. I don't think mental health is even a good metric to go off of for what legislation we should put forth because it's almost. I don't know what you think about mental health, but it's almost seemingly kind of ambiguous. Like, if,
Yeah, it's a vague term.
yeah,
It's not. Yeah.
if, say, for example, a mother is possibly going to get PTSD or she already has PTSD from this pregnancy, so does that fall under mental health? And you're allowed to get even a late term abortion if you want to? That almost sounds like bullcrap, honestly. I mean, yeah, having PTSD, that's shitty, but death is even shittier, in my opinion. And it's more importantly, the PTSD is not even really the fault of the unborn baby. So why put any blame on them and put them up for a, life termination?
Yeah, there was also another interesting part of this is whenever you hear the abortion debate, one phrase I always hear is accepting cases of rape and incest. And I've never understood why those two are put together because it seems like with rape, I understand the idea is she did not want to become pregnant. She had no intentions to do so. She is being put in a situation where her health, she has to take care of a baby now in the womb for 9 months that she never wanted, versus incest, where if it's consensual, the only problem is a slight percent chance increase of genetic abnormalities, which isn't good, but we don't. I mean, is the idea here that there's inherently less rights if there's a potential for genetic abnormalities in the
Mm.
womb? And if so, why don't we apply that outside the womb? And the answer outside the womb is because we call it eugenics and everyone hates it. When it's inside the womb, we kind of don't ever address it. I don't think it's a very good crossover for an argument, at least.
I mean, since we brought up mental health, it's kind of in the same. I kind of apply that same logic to when it comes to gun rights. So, to what extent are people mentally ill that you say that they are barred from getting a gun? It's just, and this is kind of a discussion that I got into with somebody on Twitter named Dix. Like we were talking about gender spectrums, how there are like more than two genders and so forth. You want to say that there are plenty of gender personalities, there's a personality spectrum? Well then fine, I'll give the benefit of the doubt on that, but I don't really conflate gender to be the same as sex. And I said that you're not going to be able to convince me that there is a gender spectrum by basing it off of people's subjectivity. And say, for example, a person saying, I'm non binary, and I say, okay, that's your subjectivity, whatever, moving on. And they're not going to convince me of their own subjectivity, is what I said to Dix. And it ain't a solid science if it's just based off of a person's own opinion and subjectivity, so forth. And he said, well, what about the issue of mental health, like depression? That has more to do with subjectivity or something like that. I cannot remember the exact wording of the conversation, but over Twitter he mentions depression, and I go saying that it's essentially not a hard science. Like, yeah, there is a little bit of a science behind when doctors can like prescribe you an antidepressant, but aside that, I'm not so sure if I'm convinced of that because, for example, there are different things that cause people to be depressed to where it ain't so much of a hard science. Like a movie will, a given movie, let's say, for example, A Cabin in the Woods. That's kind of one of the newer horror movies. It might actually enthrall and excite somebody who is like massively into horror movies. But say some evangelical grandma, if they were to watch that movie, it's going to depress the shit out of them. I brought up that analogy, and he did not respond after that. That was my analogy for saying of why I think that the issue of depression as a mental illness is not so much of a hard science.
Yeah,
But
and by the
I've been
way, with
talking for a while. You go on.
I think we're kind of pushing more to gun rights again. By the way, I'm talking about this in the sense of more about trying to prevent suicide than mass shootings. Because with mass shootings, most of the problems we have is a lack of current governance of the law than creating new laws. From what I've seen, at least, in terms of the fact that every single time we have a mass shooting, it seems like somehow a current law that's currently in place just didn't get enforced properly. And then people are saying, all right, we need more legislation to fix it. And it just kind of feels to me like when we're not doing enough as it is with what we have, there needs to be not more restrictions on trying to find a way to phrase this properly because I don't want to piss off any more people in the chat because I know they're going to be talking to me on Twitter here in about 20 minutes. But like people who right now we have restrictions on the kinds of guns people are allowed to buy. And then somehow they get their hands on those guns anyways and then go commit a mass shooting. And the end question is, all right, well, if we added more legislation, would that have actually helped? I mean, they already got around this law. Well, I mean, what specifically are you going to do to fix the problem? And I don't think many of the proposals I've heard have always been very convincing.
Mm. I find suicide to be kind of a very bad metric to what we base gun law off of as well. I did a response video to Progressive Voice, and he was essentially dismissing the talking point that, that pro-gun right advocates bring up, saying that 2/3 of the gun deaths here in the United States are suicide. He was all like, how's that contrary to David Hogg's point? And then the point that pro-gun rights advocates are trying to imply when they bring up the suicide statistic, like Ben Shapiro and Mr. Dapperton, for example, they brought it up plenty. What they're trying to imply there is that when a person like kills himself, that's essentially taking their own liberty. I kind of get the implication that both Ben Shapiro and Dapperton, they believe that a person committing suicide is their own right. Like when a person says right to life, they say they mean that no one has a right to take your life. But what you can do with your life, if you want to kill yourself, as shitty as that is, I cannot say that you don't have the ultimate right to do it. I mean, this is not me condoning suicide, by the way, everybody. If somebody within your life is talking about suicide and is getting suicidal, by all means, discourage them. Go on.
Like what I was gonna say is, whenever my dad was going through his depressive episodes, I took the guns, took them to my grandma's house, put them in the closet, locked him up. He had no idea where they were. Okay. I don't give a shit about his rights in that sense. Now the thing is, if the government wanted to do that, I would have had a problem. I don't want the government to be able to go in there and do that. My only thing is, if my dad were to turn around, and he's a great guy, he never would have done this. But if there is someone who's going through some very serious psychological issues and say, no, I want my guns back, and tries to take me to court, the idea behind the gun violence restraining order is you have, I think it was like 30 days, okay, where if you're able to prove some level of mental incompetency, you have 30 days to keep the guns away. But then after the 30 days, you have to get the guns back. And I don't think you're allowed to file for a second one again. I think it's centered around very making sure that if there's any restrictions of rights, it's going to be very temporary, and it's going to be for a very serious issue. And it's going to be done by individuals and not the government. And the thing is, I technically, legally, I shouldn't have been able to take the guns away. But if anyone here tells me it's immoral to take my dad's guns away in that situation, they can fuck off. Like I wasn't going to ever risk my little brother coming home from school and finding my dad dead. It's not going to fucking happen. And the thing is, I understand the concerns. I want government involved as little as possible, but it's like if there is someone there who is more or less getting to the crazy point and he wants to take me to court for taking his guns away so I can wait and try to give him some mental health help, I want some legal protection myself, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not phrasing this well enough at all, and I'm sure the chat's going to be very pissed off at me. But
and Dawn of Two Plebs is all like in the chat, I'm already angry.
I think he was talking about your conversation with a guy named Dix. Oh, I know Dix, Dix. Oh yeah, no, I like him, the crazy Blairite guy. Yeah. But by the way, right now,
why though?
Dix?
I don't know. I haven't. I mean, aside from him having some condescension, I mean, I guess there is no outright reason for me to dislike him at least as much as Owen, for example. But
he's not disingenuous at all whenever I talk to him on Twitter. Like, Owen can get very, very pissy and lies about your own arguments. Whenever I talk with Dix, he seems like he wants to have a conversation or something.
Dawn says in the chat, at Blue Republic, no, you said chat would be angry with you. Figured I'd break your balls a little over it.
Damn.
That's right. And by the way, he also says further up in the chat, attempt to have a serious conversation on gun rights with the guy named Dix. That is lost in gender nonsense. Valuable way to spend your time. Well, actually, the conversation of gun rights did not come up in that Twitter exchange that I had with him a couple months back. We were just talking purely about gender spectrum. It's just, I kind of inadvertently shifted from talking about mental health and gun rights to talking about mental health and saying how gender spectrum is and subjectivity is not a hard science, of how a person's subjectivity is not a hard science, and so that you cannot really base that off of that to say how there is a gender spectrum or multiple genders or not. And then he comes back at me saying, oh, is depression not a hard science? And so on and so forth. That was kind of what the conversation was about. Gun rights did not come up in that conversation at all. Although I did see that Dix is apparently more anti-gun than a lot of other people on Twitter are.
That's interesting. Yeah, just one last time for the chat, to know they're gonna. Well, they might be all right, but also in the comments later, I am for the expansion of gun rights into fully automatic weaponry over the coming decades. Because as the military gets stronger and stronger, it's, I think, impossible to say civilians, they're not going to have any kind of counterbalance to that. I just don't see the morality in that. And I mean, you look at places in the EU right now, which is still not they've restricted freedom of speech on criticism of religious figures. In this case, specifically Muhammad.
Down with the EU.
The EU, I have many compliments for them. They've helped out massively with Transylvania, getting Hungary and Romania to become peaceful, Spain to overthrow their own dictatorship. The economic benefits have made Bosnia and Serbia calm down and try to, or not Bosnia and Serbia, Kosovo and Serbia, to try to join the EU for the economic benefits and put apart tensions of the past, of the 90s. The EU has had some good things, but we're seeing Western governments take authoritarian measures with freedom of speech and other basic freedoms.
Yeah, they
And
have
so,
also been putting in Articles 11 and 13 and revising their copyright law to where that it's
yeah,
almost impossible for like uh, alternative news outlets in Europe to report on the news.
it prevents criticism. Many people joke about it just being an anti-meme law, but it prevents criticism of people within the country, and that's very serious.
Yeah,
And
like
America can go the same way.
if
America is not immune to this stuff.
if I lived in the EU, I wouldn't be allowed to make a response video to Progressive Voice by showing clips of his video to know reference what I'm talking about. I would just have to do a Styx, Hex, and Hammer version of a response video where I just have the points of his video written down on a WordPad file or something and just go off from there instead of my traditional format. Which I like my traditional format of a response video, by the way. I really
Yeah,
do. With the background footage, the gameplay background footage, and then I'm just in front of it, kind of taking a pose. Maybe I'm like having the thinking face, sort of, and I'm just saying why I disagree with Progressive Voice, for example, or Reason TV on some issues, or anyone else for that matter. Spain got rid of their own dictator. They hated the guy long before EU existed, said Scorch
yeah. No,
MK.
the EU came up. They joined the EU in I think 1993 it was. But what I'm talking about is the original plans for the economic in terms of economic European community was way back in 82, and Spain joined like 4 years after that. The thing was, and it was before it was called the European Union. It was called the European Economic Community. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people don't know this, and it was less political and more focused on like NAFTA kind of stuff. And one of the things that the EEC did was they pressured the dictator at the time. Um, and even right now, I think there's still like a monarchy, but uh, after Franco died and the socialists got in power, um, there was intense power or intense pressure by the EEC to push them to a more neoliberal framework. And it wasn't the European Union; it was the predecessor of the European Union that helped them push to that. But
Ah,
yeah, definitely with Transylvania and Hungary and Romania, that fighting escalated down. Alexander Vucic, current president of Serbia, officially has denounced the Srebrenica genocide as a genocide, something which we haven't seen in Serbia, but something which he's been criticized heavily in Serbia. And that was only done to please the European Union because Kosovo and Serbia want to join the EU. And the thing is, these are good things, but the European Union's shitty in 1,000 other ways I can criticize.
okay. By the way, you go mentioning the whole humanitarian aid that EU was providing regarding Transylvania. I think I just heard Secular Hawk just nut.
Oh yeah, God.
Like
I
his reason for massive intervention is for humanitarian causes and so forth. But anyway, I think we're about ready to wrap up this interview. Unless there was something else that you wanted to say.
No, I think I'm good, man. It's 11 o'clock here, so I need to be. It's Monday tomorrow. I gotta get going soon.
All right. So to everybody in the chat, especially Scorched, Red Feather, and Two Plebs, thank you for sticking around in the chat. And Common Neffel and Memes of Destruction, welcome to the show. Stay tuned in the future. I will not be hosting a Strike Force News tomorrow because instead I'll be seeing Avengers Endgame in the evening. So I'll probably host a Strike Force News, say on Tuesday, but I won't be able to do one next Sunday afternoon again. I know I haven't been on my regular schedule of Sunday afternoon, but I will try to, as soon as possible, get back on my regular schedule of Sunday afternoon. It's just that today I would have done a Sunday afternoon Strike Force news stream, but I had the interview with Blue Republic here, which I would like to say thank you, Blue, so much for joining. I'm glad that I could be flexible enough to fit in your schedule, you being like an ocean away and whatnot.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
And for everybody who has watched, check out his YouTube channel if you feel so inclined, although he doesn't often upload on there. But definitely check out his Twitter and follow him there, and just, I guess, politically spar with him. As some of you probably will. Or just talk. Not necessarily spar, but just talk. But yeah, anyway. Blue Republic, everybody. That is the end of this interview. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Strike Force Interviews. And, yeah, we'll see you all in the next stream. See y'all later, and God bless.